Mallorca is an island known for its incredible climbs, but what it's not known for is any of them being particularly difficult. Most of them have fairly low single-digit percentages. However, I know of one that's not quite like that.
The climb I'm talking about is the Sobremunt. According to Strava, it's 6.6 kilometers in length with an average gradient of 8.8%. However, it's a super irregular climb with plenty of sections well above 20% and a very rough surface in places. The KOM currently stands at 24 minutes and 40 seconds, and when I attempted this climb 2 years ago, I did it in just shy of 32 minutes.
Quite a few years ago now, GCN featured it in one of their videos, calling it the hardest climb on the island. And I want to see just how close to the KOM I can get today. In order to hit some of my really ambitious goals this season, like a 5 watt per kilo FTP, I decided I needed a new training approach. During the off season, I discovered Join Cycling and signed up to give it a go. Join was excellent a couple of weeks ago when I got ill. It allowed me to adapt to be able to recover properly from my illness and not overtrain myself while recovering. And because of that, it's allowed me to get to Mallorca this week feeling really fresh and ready for these huge efforts I've got planned.
Join Cycling has genuinely revolutionised my training, allowing me to be far more consistent than I've ever been in the past. If you'd like to give Join Cycling a go, click my link in the description below. It'll give you a 30-day free trial and you will not need to put in any card details whatsoever. So get yourself on Join Cycling and try it risk-free today. Right, on with the climb. And right at the start, you can see my big error on this effort. I set off far too hard, sprinting as soon as my Garmin beeped to say the segment had started. With a threshold of 330 watts, I definitely should not be pushing well over 400 and even touching 500 watts this early on. I knew because of the irregular gradients, I could push a bit harder than I needed to on the steep sections. However, I just got way too carried away with this. After starting in some open grassland, the climb ends up winding its way into the woods. This is where the real steep gradients start. There are several sections where I am really out of the saddle, grinding away, even in my tiny 34-36 climbing gear. And again, you can see just how much power I'm pushing here, going over 400 watts again. This really was not sustainable. Fortunately, there was some respite on a little bit of a flatter section, which allows me to drop the power without having as much of an impact on my pace. Every time one of these hit, I tried to give my legs as much recovery as possible so I could smash the watts again when the road kicked up. You can see now though that I was really starting to suffer. My heart rate was through the roof so early on in the effort. Every time one of the steep hairpins hit, I was proper out of the saddle, putting as much power through the pedals as I could. And now it's time to discuss the second mistake I made on the day. Despite it being February, I was massively overdressed for the weather. It was really sunny and probably knocking on 20 degrees, and I'd gone out in pretty much winter kit. So you can see here I've had to pull down my arm warmers to just try and cool down a little bit. Fortunately, I had another section with a gentle gradient, and I knew coming up ahead there was a fairly long descent. However, my memory of where it occurred was slightly wrong. I thought it was coming far sooner than it actually was, and I still had quite a bit of climbing left before we hit the main descent. So every time I could see a short little downhill section, I was going way too deep on the little kickers beforehand, blowing my legs up completely. Over the next few clips, you can see just how rough the surface of this road can get in places. I was bouncing around all over the show. I don't think the really skinny high pressure tyres on my hire bike help, and I think by swapping to some lower pressure wider tyres it will massively improve my performance up this climb, allowing me to keep down the power far easier. And finally the long awaited downhill section arrived. I could finally give my legs a bit of rest before the final steep hairpins up to the top. But like all good things, it was over far too soon, and I was at the turning up to the final switchbacks. And this is where I made my third mistake. I went straight past the left-hander I was meant to turn at here, and because of that lost all my momentum and I had to do a really awkward 180 turn to get going back in the right direction.
Thank you.
And this is where the surface gets even rougher, borderline gravel in places, up these final few switchbacks right onto the top of the mountain. At this point I'd completely blown, and it was just a game of survival, trying to hold 300 watts for as long as I could, pushing harder on the steep hairpins and giving myself a little bit of a break on the shallower straights. And then right at the top I was being cheered on by an unwanted fan. That really did get my heart rate up.
Yes, I'm fucking on.
And I was so out of it by the top, I almost flew straight off the end of the road into the woods. Only just stopping in time.
Oh, that was so much harder than I expected. I am a bit overdressed for the heat today, actually. It's quite warm. I managed it in about 29 minutes, which isn't unfortunately good enough for a top 10, but it should be a respectable showing. Faster than I've done it before. Last time I came up here, it was around 32. So happy with that. I just struggled to keep the power when it got choppy on this rough stuff, especially on these narrow tyres. I'm going to have to give it another go at some point though and see how it goes. Also, despite it being a really irregular gradient, I do think I paced the steep pinches a bit too aggressively, and I probably should have held back a little bit more, even though I knew there was going to be a short downhill stretch about 2/3 of the way up, which I was hoping to hold out for, but I didn't quite make it before my legs started to go. If it had come slightly sooner, I think I would have been able to keep it going, but I just completely cracked. I managed to put a bit of a dig in up that final steep bit, but it is what it is. We'll be back next time. I didn't enjoy that dog chasing me at the top though. I think it's still waiting there to guard me on the way down. Just about can see him there guarding the road. Look at that view though. Awesome.
Jumping on Strava now and back home, you can see I completed the climb in around 29 minutes and 20 seconds. I averaged 308 watts for the effort with 317 watts normalised. So you can see that quite a big difference between my normalised and average power shows just how aggressively I paced some of the steeper sections. This strategy, whilst I think critical to getting a good time up this climb, was just a little bit too aggressive, and I don't think I executed it very well. So in preparation for next time, I'm going to run the numbers on best bike split and come up with a really decent pacing plan to implement that aggressive kicking harder on the steep sections without blowing my legs up. And I think with a really good pacing plan, knocking a minute off and getting a top 10 on Strava is definitely achievable. Especially since my threshold is now way higher up at 330 watts. When you compare the power I did on this effort to Sacalobra a couple of days earlier, where I held 330 watts for a similar amount of time, you can see them really hard, spiky efforts just completely cooked my legs. So today's effort didn't quite go to plan, but I'm going back out to Mallorca next week, and this time I'm bringing my bike with me. And now that bike has got 30mm tubeless tyres that I can run at a nice low pressure. And now with another month and a half of training my legs, following my joint cycling plan, I am even fitter than I was back in February. If you're interested in checking out that video, make sure you get yourself subscribed down below, give this video a thumbs up and get active in the comments. Do you know of any other climbs in Mallorca that might be able to take the Sobremunt's crown, or is the Sobremunt genuinely the hardest climb on the island? Let me know in the comments below. And if you're interested in maxing out your own cycling performance, make sure you give Join Cycling a go using my link for a free 30-day trial. Until then, I will see you all in the next one.